struggle to, you know, I struggle to define it, and out of choice, because I don't want to give it that legitimacy, you know, but unfortunately that exists. So like, how would you describe, you know, social slash racial hierarchy here?
Wait, do you want me? Oh my God, do you want me to do it? Or
No, I mean, you know, I think it's an important question to ask, and it's a difficult one, because I think a lot of people would not admit to this, and it goes back to what you said about, you know, social proof. You know, there are examples of this. There are people who have, you know, hurt you because of that need for social proof more than anything else. So it does point to, you know, some sort of systemic hierarchy, or a systemic, or a mental model that everybody has in their head. Like, I will deny it, or I will say that I will disagree with it, but I am aware of it. You know,
of course, that's exactly
You know,
what I'm
so-
thinking. I mean, for me, one thing I think about a lot is white privilege. I think about this a lot, and how I think about it is, I am aware that I have white privileges, but I will never be aware of my white privileges, because I will never know, did being white help me specifically in this interview? Did it help me specifically with this client? Did it specifically help me while I was looking with this agent for a new apartment? I know it's there, but I will never be able to understand really how in detail my privilege is given. You know what I mean? All I can try to tell myself is, Jazz, you got to be aware of the fact that you have this damn privilege.
Okay.
And that you cannot understand what it's like for someone else. Like, I can hear your stories. Remember when you told me that you took your WhatsApp picture out when you guys were looking for an apartment?
Oh yeah.
And that's in my head all the time, because I sure did not struggle to get something when I whipped out my German passport,
Yep.
you know, and so I'm aware of these things, but and then that's again why I'm struggling with like putting it in, like, I don't see it, but I want to be aware, because I am the privileged one, and I'll be very, very blind, ignorant to not have this awareness or remind myself of it. You know what I mean?
You know, Jasmine, like, knowing you, I know for a fact that when it comes to interviews, you ace it not because you're white, it's because you're awesome, right? So,
I'll take it.
yeah. About the rental part, though, I mean, that's an unfortunate reality. I've talked about this before in previous podcast episodes. For context, for people who are listening to this, you know, when it comes to renting apartments, there's a lot of things that I do to maximize my chances of viewing. One of them includes removing my picture from WhatsApp, simply because I don't get refused at first go when they see that I'm Indian. It is a reality that I've come to accept. It's an unfortunate one, but you know, you got to do what you got to do.
So, like, if we talk about hierarchy, I think what I can say is, from my experience, no one gives a shit when I'm walking around with a Chinese man. No one would give a shit if I walk around with a white man, I guess. Not that I made the experience of holding hands with a white man in Singapore ever.
I don't know about with the Chinese man.
I want to say, so my experience is, and don't have a lot of experience, but my experience is that it's not something that gets a lot of attention. Black man does get attention, but I don't think it's the attention for a white woman and a black man. It's the attention of a black person in Singapore.
Right.
Because
Okay.
like
Right.
I've just a week ago I was on a bus, and it was this gorgeous black woman was in the bus, and I saw her walking out the bus, and I just watched this crowded bus stop staring at her. Like, I didn't
Okay.
look at her, I just looked at her surroundings, and literally every single person just looked at her walking away. Every single person standing there. So that's why I'm saying, like, I think when I'm walking with a black man in Singapore, it's not so much about our, like, this interracial couple. It's just like a black person. It's just like it's still kind of a new thing here, or just a rarity. I think most stares I definitely get for being with a brown man. That's like the only thing I can say about hierarchy. And then we spoke about earlier, what you get for Singaporean Chinese and what I get for, like, oh, okay, wow. So
She's open-minded.
yeah, exactly.
Right. I will say this, though. So it's like in a lot of internet forums, especially, you know, which are more often than not, you know, male-dominated. There's a lot of talk about how they're like, oh, fucking, girls from Singapore, they don't like us Singaporean men. They just prefer, white men, AMDK and all that shit. And hypocritically, they fetishize, if the fact that there's let's say a Chinese man with a white woman. So it's like these forums are all about fucking Singaporean women always trying to get white dick, and then when there are pictures of Asian people or Singaporeans with a white woman, then like, oh yeah boy, you made it. So it's like on the one hand, there is a disdain.
You judge that,
yeah,
but then you like go for it,
right?
brother.
So it points to a lot of saltiness, essentially. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting a girl.
I'm not getting laid, so let me get angry.
It totally must be because she has a white fetish. But then if I get laid with a white girl, it's because I'm awesome. So there's a lot of that personal stuff.
Which again leads to this whole fetish thing. I'm still trying to find out for myself if I think this is positive or negative. You know what I mean? Like, okay, obviously I hate it when people have the fucking audacity to ask me for my man's dick size. Yeah. Absolutely hate it. But it's gotten to a point where it used to be uncomfortable to me just playing along and be like, yeah. You know what I mean? Or whatever, like pushing it, because you can be either uncomfortable, you make jokes about it, or you just snap back and kind of throw a shade that people know I shouldn't have done that. So I've kind of like I've found my ways on how I respond to it. Either sometimes I just laugh at it, sometimes I'm just go quiet, but whatever I feel is I can do with this person, I'd like to let them know that I'm annoyed with this question and it's inappropriate, but you usually kind of do it in joke ways so that hopefully the message gets delivered.
How do they respond to it? Like when you go like, hey, it's not cool that you ask me about, dick size and stuff?
I think when I've never thought so much about it, but if I think about my two typical response, I think it would be, one is, first of all, 90% of the questions that I'm getting are asked by men is like,
wow, okay.
Is that insecurity asking? That's a response I like to get back. No, that's my reply.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, phew.
Are you asking out of insecurity? Because it's none of your business. You know what I mean? So I just let you sit with that. I think that's a common one. And the other one is, again, probably very similar. Why am I getting this question only when I'm dating a black man?
Right.
So I think I like to just, instead of answering, just throw that back and make people think. I definitely, whenever I get this question, I make sure people understand that I get this question way too often. Just to let that sit with them without judging it. Just kind of like be aware that I get this question a lot and let them think about it. Is it okay that I asked that just now? Because she seems to get that a lot. Why do people ask that all the time?
I wonder if it's because people think of it as a positive stereotype. So it's like, big dicks are great. And like, if I ask her about, big dicks, like maybe she would like, talk about it with pride. I don't know. Cause I don't know.
Weird.
It's like, it's an overtly sexual question that shouldn't necessarily come up in small talk. But
yeah, man, he's so big. Like,
it's
fuck.
I don't know. So in some ways it's a positive stereotype, and especially among men, where it's like, our self-esteem is directly proportional to the size of our dick, so
which, by the way, shouldn't be the case, guys.
I try to tell myself that every night. No, but I think the reality is that like a lot of people think of it as a positive stereotype, and I think because they don't know enough black people, they probably don't know what's acceptable questions and what aren't. Because if there were like a much larger black population or an African population, maybe these conversations would have happened sooner earlier in their lives, and then they would know like what cultural faux pas not to, stumble into. So
it might be very similar to, that boy 9 years ago that was like, oh, white girl, I'll just take her home.
Yeah,
and then he didn't really, I don't think he meant to insult me. He was like, party on, girl. I came for you. And so.
But you did mention that he was like, afterwards quite contrite, and he was like, oh shit.
Like you could see it working, like inside his mind, like, wait, this is not how it works. But you blonde, right? Like kind of like this, right? So that's why I'm saying whenever we talk about this, I'm trying to I'm trying to figure out for myself, am I supposed to be offended? Is this fetish thing a bad thing or a good thing? Because reality is I'm 30 years old, and the only thing I can say about my stereotype, about the type of men that I'm going for, is that they are what's exotic to me. As I said, I've never dated a blonde, blue-eyed man. But other than that, you can't really narrow it down, because in the end, you better be smart, and that's when I like you. Like, then there's more like character stuff that I go for. So I've always had this, and I'm always just wondering, is it curiosity? Is it good? Is it bad? Like, what is this? What is the intention of this question? Where am I putting it? Is it a neutral question?
I'm definitely not neutral. I mean, how do you ask neutrally? So, about your boyfriend's dick.
That was just an example, but I'm just saying like, you also said, you know, that these girls have a white man fetish. I'm just saying, like, whenever you call it a fetish, which to me is just a preference in appearance, you know, which in the end, the first thing I noticed about the man that I'm with was his appearance, you know, and that could be his smile, that could be whatever, but in the end, that's why we then ended up having conversation and getting to know each other more. So I'm just wondering, like, calling it a fetish or whatever, isn't it just a preference?
So I'm also very conflicted about this, because I've been told that I have a certain fetish, which in my mind is fucking crazy. Like, there are people who tell me that, oh, do you have like an Asian girl fetish? Do you have like a Chinese girl fetish? And I'm like, I have a fetish for anyone who agrees to go out with me. You know, it's just, I'm just desperate. Right?
I'll make friends with hookers. Honestly, wanted to do this already earlier, and I just, sorry.
No, all good. But that's the thing, right? So it's like, you know, I have the same struggle as you do, in the sense that I've often, like, especially when I get questions, you know, from our friends, and especially like, you know, when I reveal certain details about my past dating life, and then they join the dots and like, oh, another, you know, Chinese girl. It's like, oh, is that a fetish? So it might be facetious, but at the same time, I try to think about whether, wait, is there an actual preference or racial preference that I have? You mentioned something about novelty. You mentioned something about, you know, exotic. So if you grow up in a particular place, and if you're living in a multicultural society, there is a sense of, oh, you know, this is something new and novel, so I'd like some of that. I'd like to try that. I'd like to, you know, figure out what they're about. Would that be considered a fetish? I don't think so. But I think we have to constantly ask ourselves this question. And if our dating history has a particular pattern, we owe it ourselves to understand it. I don't think we should judge ourselves for it.
Yeah, but for example, I understand my dating pattern.
Okay, right.
I was 12 years old, and my first crush was Usher. I was obsessed with R&B and rap music, and everyone that I idolized and I was a fan of was black. So it was not surprising that growing up, I ended up dating black men.
So this points
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But that again also is a bit of a culture thing. We spoke about that before, not here, but hip hop has a certain vocabulary. There's a certain humor. There's a certain way to dress and all that stuff. And then there's just easy to be on one page, on the same page. So like, I know where that comes from. Do I consider it a fetish? No, you know?
So, and this is where things get pretty interesting. So I personally believe that our preferences, and not fetish, our preferences are influenced a lot by media, right? So, you know, I know that we're going back to like social proof and stuff like that, but, you know, media influence, in my opinion, does play a huge part in how we perceive certain groups of people and how we want to align with certain groups of people. You know, to go back to, you know, some of our, you know, some Indian men who fetishize white skin, for example, a lot of it, you know, can be chalked to media influence. You know, the prevalence of media, the prevalence of Eurocentric beauty standards does play a part.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the case, because in the end, the vast majority of Indian men prefer Indian women, and it boils down to, you know, cultural affinity and all that stuff. But there is that, you know, positive reinforcement through media, and I dare say, like, you know, all of our preferences come through that, right? So,
yeah,
is it a bad thing? Not really, but does it deserve some self-introspection? Perhaps. I struggle with this, because when everybody talks about preference and fetishes, it's more often than not in a negative sense, and it's more often than not from someone else. You know, we don't think of it as a fetish. We don't think it's just a preference. Like, she was there. That's my preference. 2 meters apart. That's pretty much it. So, but then you start looking at whether did you put yourself there specifically because of these things, or are there certain environments that you like because of that particular situation or people? Then it gets pretty murky and weird. And I just honestly, I struggle with this a lot too. And I don't know.
I think, to be honest, every time I'm asking myself this whole, how do I feel about people's reaction when I tell them I'm dating a black or brown man? Because it always gets a reaction. And I'm wondering, am I insulted? Am I annoyed? Am I just accepting it? I'm always trying to be obviously very neutral, because I know sometimes I'm pushing it, because I'm just like, yeah, of course you're going to have a reaction. Let me just add a little to it.
I am like that
sometimes. So, but I think my conclusion is always, I think I just want to be in a world where no one reacts.
As someone who enjoys attention, like I will take attention in any form. It can be simply because I have yellow boots and I'm wearing nothing else. That's the kind of attention that I enjoy. And if this helps me get that attention, I wouldn't mind it. But it does go back to what you said about, is it coming in from a good place? Like questions about of a very intimate nature, like what you often get.
I think I know why it bothers me. I feel that the moment I told someone that my boyfriend is either black or brown or a mix, and it was this, oh, good for you, like this you're making an effort to enter this community, it almost made me feel like he was lower than me. You know what I mean? That someone was like, oh wow, this white girl, she went out there, and sometimes I think I get very protective over my partner because I don't want anyone to think that I'm doing this for charity. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think I don't like the idea that someone thinks my race is better than the race that I'm dating. And that implication in the back of my mind makes me uncomfortable when the question comes.
This is a tough one, and I dare say it's out of the scope of interracial dating, but there is something that's been, there's a concept that's been doing the rounds on the Singaporean internet lately. It's called Pinkerton Syndrome. Have you heard of it?
No.
So Pinkerton Syndrome is essentially, for the lack of a better definition, white fetish. So it is an internalized belief that white is right, West is best, and therefore positive attributes are applied to white people in the sense that they're smarter, they're more capable, and therefore higher deserving of salaries and all that stuff. The reason why I bring this up is because Singapore, of course, is a post-colonial country. There's a lot of talk about post-colonial hangover and all that stuff, and also the fact that it's a multicultural city with a lot of people and all that, and you tend to ascribe a certain economic and social desirability to different people. I'm not saying this is exclusively for white people. I would say that this also applies to people from Japan and Korea. Like, holy shit, the Japan boner that Singapore has is incredible. I was reading this article last year. So apparently in 2019 or 2018, Singaporeans spent a grand total of $1 trillion in Japan. In tourism.
Why am I not surprised?
And it's like, so
it's an obsession.
Yeah, so could it be like a Japan fetish? Maybe not. But then again, so Japanese folks have a lot of positive, social and cultural attributes, and it's just considered like awesome to be associated with it, right? And I find this very interesting because I've also heard stories about some people talking about the cliquish nature of Japanese expats, which is something that a lot of people say a lot of things about expat cliques, right? So it's like a Japanese expat clique is not considered bad. It's just that, them just being themselves and all that. Whereas an Indian expat clique is like, oh, look at these guys, thinking that they're better than us. A white expat
or not integrating, not making the effort, but leave the Japanese be.
Yeah, there we go. There was an interesting article in Rice Media about the French enclave in Serangoon. And so one guy was interviewed, and it's like, oh, they're my neighbors, but we don't get to talk that much, and they don't speak English, and then that's because out of their country and they're not speaking English, and that's fine. That takes a while and all that stuff. And
But see,
I've
like
seen them
this
for
makes
years
me
and-
so angry,
it's
and
a-
I think
it's a-
that's,
yeah.
and I think really this is the core of the feeling of when I'm uncomfortable, because then we're talking about my partner, someone that I
Yeah.
love, someone that I respect, someone that I admire, and then you talk to me like I lowered myself to be with this man that like I'm thinking is like the best thing in the world. You know what I mean? So I think you get naturally very protective and very like just extremely uncomfortable. I mean, if even outside of dating, I made the experience in Singapore when I wanted to enter a club and I was told you can come in for free, but your brown girls, but your brown friends stay outside.
That's
And you're
just
just like, what the fuck?
fucking
You think I'm gonna go party
holy
alone in your
shit, dude.
shit club? You know, like it's just, I mean, stuff like that. And I think it's just normal that. I think that's where I feel uncomfortable, because there's no props or whatever. There's just this sense of getting really protective over the person that I love as an equal.
I know, Jasmine, I totally feel you on this.
Yeah.
Like, because you're looking at the person, and then, like, and a lot of this happens for a lot of our friends too. It's like everybody's just looking at the race, and everybody's looking at, perceived social desirability of that particular category, and it just angers a lot of people. And yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
But having said this, Jasmine, like, has it gotten to a point of actual strain? Has it like strained your relationship, if I may ask? Relationships, if I may ask.
No,
Okay.
not the relationships. I mean, I think all the men I've dated, except for the Sri Lankan guy with his mom, who was a bit worried, I think they all had been in interracial relationships themselves, and came from. I mean, if you talk about a black man, it's very common that they've dated outside the races, because outside their race, because if they. Most of the countries have more Caucasian people,
Yeah.
so
Statistically, that's just going to be
yeah.
the case, right? Yeah.
So like it was less uncommon, and I think, as I said, for the Sri Lankan guy, there was this example where I know his mom was scared, and then she was like, "Wait a minute, you've been paying your bills on time ever since that girl showed up. Tell her I said hi. How's she doing? Let me send you guys something. And I appreciate
I know it comes
that.
from a good place, but that's still kind of.
But then you know what I liked about it? I felt like I got to make it right. Like I
Right.
felt a little bit like this whole worry and this whole that stereotype she had put on me. I got to clear that up, because he was doing better. He was in time for his job and all that stuff. Like he was doing better when I came. So I managed to just still show her, hey, white woman is a good woman too. So I kind of to me it ended up being a good experience, because I felt like I could get it right.
Well, I guess that it would change if it happens time and time again, to the point where you probably go like, why am I putting the work to change their minds? And I think, and once again, maybe I'm just speaking from my experience, but it's like, for me, it's always been about, overcoming certain stereotypes, when, especially, from my partner's friends and all that. Not right now, but like previously. And so the struggle has always been me trying to punch above my weight, just to somehow be worthy of, their appreciation. Where it's like, oh, he's not like the others. And every time I hear that, right, it just rankles so much. Like every once in a while, it's fine, and I get it. A lot of people probably haven't seen or interacted with Indian nationals that much, and I totally get it. Like, quick side, some of my colleagues, I'm the first Indian national that they've met.
Yeah.
So like they of course have these stereotypes and all that, but after like meeting with me, I've just become their window to India. And it's like every morning, like this sweet old lady, she'd be like, oh, like this happened, like I read this news about this aircraft that crashed in the airport, is that close to your place, and all that stuff. So
You should be like, this is close to my place, but did you know Indians have huge dicks? She'd be like, noted.
nah, she'd be like, how dare you speak to me like that? And then she goes back home and she's like,
No, now you hold the responsibilities of all Indians. And you can create a picture here. Don't mess it up.
No, I mean, so I do enjoy that facet. So it goes back to the idea that, people are just regular folks. And,
But again, something that makes me a bit angry, because I'm the privileged white woman, and Germany is a little bit of Japan and of Europe. Like, oh, you guys
right,
on time,
so you
you're
guys got everything
efficient,
right.
You're this and this, and I'm like, no, our trains break down all the time. Like, we're far from Japan. That's like one thing. But then also there's this constant that I'm efficient. You know why I'm efficient? Because I'm the laziest fuck. So, but Malays are lazy, but I'm efficient. I'm like, no, 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 no. You didn't like the reason I'm efficient is so I can go home early and put my feet up and do nothing anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, but
yeah.
no one would ever said that to me. So I think what makes me angry here is that. Again, and you're someone that I love, and I have so many friends that are Indians and Sri Lankan, whatever. I feel like you have to fight a very different stereotype. Yes, I had this one thing, where people be like, "Oh, the wild white woman." How much does it really affect me in my real life, in my day to day? It doesn't really. But
Yeah.
what bothers me is what you have in dating and in life is just that simply something that you're given that has nothing to do with you, your country where you were born in. There's nothing that you've like that I'm German is nothing that I achieved.
Yeah.
It doesn't say shit about me, but people are like, this is one efficient woman, in time, smart, all that stuff that just comes with my passport
Yeah.
that I have not done anything for, and you have the negative stuff that you have to path the way sometimes even,
Yeah, I mean, so I don't dwell on this, because
No, you shouldn't.
like once again, like the way I
Not
see
worth
it.
the energy.
No, but like the way I see it, a lot of these difficulties, as I said before, can be overcome and are overcome with just a wee bit of effort, right? So I think the problem comes when comparisons are made, right? So there's someone I know who once talked about this. So we were just talking about our friends who are struggling with this and always tend to talk about how it's a struggle being an Indian man and all that stuff. And he said something interesting to the tune where it's because we're making comparisons. We're making comparisons with different groups of people, and somehow we feel like,
Give
why
me
is
an
this?
example of comparison.
So, let's say you're traveling in Cambodia in a bus, right? So if you're traveling in Cambodia in a bus, and let's say you're hanging out with a bunch of people and all that, the bus drivers are more likely to pick out tourists who are Western versus someone who is Indian or Chinese, etc., etc., right? So, and by virtue of that, the people that bus driver chose gets to go on one bus and they get to forge relationships, whereas this person who eventually catches up misses out on all that stuff. And so this person feels like, oh, I feel like I missed out because of my race, in this particular instance, there's probably some prejudice at play, or just some sort of idea that the Cambodian bus driver thinks that these are Western tourists, so they're probably going to pay more. So it's a purely economic concern, perhaps. But like, it just builds up a narrative that somehow a particular group, simply by being socially desirable, gets more opportunities than this person does, right? So then it trickles down into dating, it trickles down into employment and all of that stuff, right? So what I was told, about that particular instance, was that, comparisons can kill you, right? It's important to understand that your journey, especially in dating, has to be your own.
Yeah.
And making comparisons, it's unfortunate. Sometimes it's the reality of
Toxic.
things, but, just work on yourself and just figure it out, right? And I've always taken that approach, and it has helped me in a lot of ways. I like to think, and at the risk of bragging, I like to think that I use these stereotypes to my advantage, and not in a weird way. Like, I'm not I'm not like trying to perpetuate stereotypes or just lean on them for social validation, but it's just like talking
You're
about
aware
it.
of it, and I think that is great. I have been with someone who is like this tall black man in Singapore and in other countries that he's lived in as well. He is used to walking into the room and being the center of attention because it's impossible not to notice him.
Yeah.
And he loves it. Like, he
Owns
makes
it.
it work. He fucking owns it.
Yeah.
And he makes it work in his job. He makes it work in whenever he goes out, wherever he travels. And I think that's amazing. Like, I admire that about him. But what I know, like, for myself, I'm a social person. I like to talk and all that stuff, but I don't like to get attention in that sense. Like, I remember when I remember whenever I walk through Little India and people stare at me, I just wanted, if there was a tunnel I could choose, I would do it. And
Right.
and like, but or even when I'm with with a partner of a different color and people look at us, I don't think it's great. I'd rather not be looked at all. When I go to a food court, people look at me because I know how to use an Asian spoon. I get props for that. And like, y'all haven't seen me with chopsticks. You think I'm here for 2 days. So it's just like, I've been here for 7 years. I kind of would not like to get it, but what I'm trying to say is, and again, I am from a race where I don't have to worry because it's usually my advantage. But if I was Indian, as someone who doesn't like the attention so much, then it's just, I don't know how to work with it. You can, and so does the man that I just mentioned. But what I'm saying is, it's not always fair because you need to be a type of person that is, some people's strength is not talking and breaking ice. And
that's fair.
It's good and important to be aware of and to be honest, I make use of it too. Or like, as I said, I want to be aware of my privileges, but I'm just saying that not everyone can work with it the way you can. Not everyone is as charming as you are, Rindo.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I take that compliment wholeheartedly. It's true, folks. But no, I you know what? I just realized that.
No, but you are one of these people that own it. Like, honestly, Rindo, you are one of the only people out of all the people I met in 7 years in Singapore, that I remember. Like, I have a picture of you when I saw you the first time in that bar talking about your trip and like saying a lot of really inappropriate jokes, and I just like, I remember you there.
Well,
I have this picture of you because you were like this guy that was telling the story and everyone was listening to you, and it just worked for you, make all this fun of also this, you use the stereotype to make fun of and stuff like this. You really work it, but not everyone does. So
I mean, now that you put it that way, I realize that it's unreasonable to expect everyone to. It's like, oh, hey guys, are you sad? Stop being sad. Oh, are you not confident? Be confident. Okay, that was probably not the best approach to take, but I mean, and especially when it comes to dating, I think everybody is vulnerable.
We should. People don't know that, but there was a time we wanted to do a flirt or dating consultancy. We should fucking do that. Are you Indian? Do you need confidence? Here is your
Be
coach.
confident.
Oh,
Indian
man.
hitch here.
Oh man.
Oh my god. Wow, that was a while ago.
Got a first client coming later.
Oh man, good stuff. Preference versus prejudice. We did cover some of this.
We did,
we did. Yeah. So as part of this, I want to show you a video.
Having a racial preference when dating?
No.
Yes.
Depends. Some people, it matters to their family. Some of them have grandparents that only speak Chinese, and you want them to integrate into your family, and then that's an issue. So then, I think for some people, yes, you want a specific race. But then if for my background, where it doesn't pacify anybody, then I think it doesn't matter. But then at the same time, it's also like, why can't you have a Malay boyfriend and then teach my family to integrate this Malay person also? That one is very difficult because you have to educate so many people. So I think it's okay to have a racial preference for sake of ease.
So my mom is Chinese. I was predominantly brought up by my mom. My dad's Polish. My brother lives with my dad. His racial preference is European. My racial preference is Chinese. And that has a lot to do with family background, upbringing, whether preferences in even lifestyle. So I think when I consider all those factors of chemistry and how I bond with this person, I would choose someone that has chemistry with me. I think that has almost nothing to do with race. If I meet a Malay girl or an Indian girl or white girl who shares those attributes with me, I think I would find the same kind of chemistry and still choose to date her and whatever. But because I'm used to my upbringing and my culture right now, it is easier for me to find someone with similar preferences. So this is why I said no.
I'm very confused because based on your justification, your answer should be yes.
Why?
Because you said you would date someone who is Indian, Malay, white.
Because of the assumption that you would have more
in common.
Yeah.
I think the racism comes from the fact that you assume that only people of a certain race will fit your preference. So going back to what you said about chemistry, watching shows, eating food, you're assuming that is primarily Chinese people that will fit this preference, and that is racist.
So when you think about racial preference, you think it's very individual choice, but it is not. Because you are a person who lives in a society, who lives within a family, who lives within a country, who lives in the world, all your like choices, right? Whatever you think are choices and free wills are not. They are shaped by your biases, they are shaped by how you are brought up, by who your parents are and how they were brought up. And sometimes a lot of it is subconscious. You don't even realize that you have the bias. So for you to like think about it as like, no, it's not racist, it's a bit problematic because you also don't know, and I don't think it's your fault. You also don't know that, oh shit, I'm like biased in this sense, you know? And I think that's the thing that we need to like maybe read more about or talk more about and like make ourselves aware that it kind of like exists at the surface.
Like even when I first met my girlfriend's family, who's Chinese, I had to sort of kind of like get them to understand how we have chemistry, or like how I can be easily included within their family and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But
That's
the
the
problem.
Like they assume that you cannot fit into their family.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
at
putting
least you
in-
got to that step. People have told me, oh, I don't date Malays. Before even speaking to me, the fact that your dating pool has now insanely decreased because you're of a particular race.
I mean, I appreciate that you have experienced it before, and so maybe you understand a bit better, but minorities experience that a lot.
Yeah.
My experience and my friends' experiences as Indian women. Non-Indians, they are like, we don't want to date you because you're Indian. And then there are the Indian men who use Chinese women to increase their privilege. And then they don't want us also. And you're like, why is my race always such a stumbling block when it comes to dating?
Having understood this a little bit better, I want to change my answer. Like forming relationships, especially romantic relationships, is something that is like almost one of our baser human rights, you know, and it really shouldn't be affected by something like race.
Thank you.
So, this, like, okay, so what are your thoughts about the video?
I like that every opinion is brought in. I think every comment was sensible and reasonable, to be honest. I don't even think there's any of these that I would take out. I really like what he said, the Polish Chinese guy who said, I think my preference is very much to what I'm known and who I it's something I said earlier, right? Like for me, hip hop culture, people that listen to the same music, that have the same, you know, the same type of comedy and that we'll laugh at and all that stuff, it's much easier for me to connect with, and I click really quickly with these people, and that sometimes is more reflected in one specific race. So I really like what he said there. I think my preference is not really a color, but maybe what I'm used to and what I grew up and where I find more people that I'm connecting with is more reflected in one specific race. So I agree with that, but I also agree with what the lady on the right said, in terms of there are biases that we're not aware of, and we have to talk more to make ourselves aware of it.
I agree with I agree with a lot of points that you said, and I dare say that they make a lot of sense, but I also understand that this is a curated space, and I just felt like they weren't speaking their mind, you know? Let's take the Polish Chinese dude, for example. He was like, oh, I'm okay with anyone as long as they fit with certain values. And I believe that the Indian girl called him out on it. And okay, call him out is probably like not the right word to use, but I just felt like everybody's trying so hard to be politically correct at the expense of being truthful, you know? And that's all I have to say about that specific piece. I want to focus on what the Indian girl said.
The last one that said the whole bias thing? That
No,
we're not aware of it?
The other girl who said that Indian men choose Chinese girls, you know, to elevate themselves.
Oh, of course.
So this was very interesting
Not
because
choose, she said use Chinese girls.
yes, use Chinese girls, right? So essentially, it goes back to what we talked about, social proof. So
It goes back to urine, though.
yeah, I know.
No, but no.
Okay, so here's the context, right? So I was hanging out with a bunch of podcasters, and they showed me this video. So we're like, you know, hanging out at their place, and then, you know, they played this video, and then this came up, and I was like, what? And then one of the guys like, so, you know?
Spotlight on you.
Yeah. So then, like, I was just kind of flustered. So then, when I went back home, I watched this video again, and then then I realized she didn't use like all Indian men. It was like some Indian men, etc., etc. So maybe she has had some experience, but I think we cannot discount the fact that if, as an Indian woman, she probably does have certain prejudices and stereotypes that she needs to overcome, and that needs to be I don't know if it needs to be addressed, but like we need to be made aware of it, right? So that was like an interesting way
We
of
should
looking
know
at
her reality
Yeah.
and like include that into the whole picture.
it. Yeah. As a short aside, there was this OkCupid survey sometime in the 2009 or 2011 or something, where they looked at so OkCupid at the time was the biggest dating platform in the world at the time, and so they had like a ton of data as to who gets the most matches, who gets the fastest responses, and all that stuff. So they managed to like categorize who gets more dates than they have to send messages to, which kind of people or which nationality like sends the most people to, and all that. So the outcome of that survey was that Asian men and black women consistently get the least responses, the least dates, despite putting in disproportionately more work into this, right? So there are these things that come into play. It isn't necessarily anybody's fault. So the person who doesn't respond to, let's say, an Asian man or a black woman, like, isn't racist because they don't do it, but like collectively there's a pattern, So those are the things that I think she as an Indian woman is facing, so she's like, I don't think she's pointing fingers on specific races and all that. It's just that the odds are often stacked, which makes her struggle. I want to go back to what I earlier said about not making comparisons. And I think this is a good example where even though she doesn't want to, it's just still thrown in her face all the time. And so that was one interesting aspect of it. What the Malay girl was talking about, where it's like, cultural affinity, it would be nice to have someone who can speak language to my grandparents and stuff like that. I understand that, but at the same time, I often feel like it's a cop-out, because if I were to be subjective, this wouldn't happen if she was dating a Japanese man. Maybe I'm being subjective, maybe I'm being judgmental right now, maybe I'm assuming, but if someone is paired with someone of high social desirability, none of these things matter. It goes back to a conversation I had with someone with relation to renting and real estate, and this is a conversation literally about discrimination. So he was like, he's in the rental space, and he was like, yeah, these things exist, but once you establish that you are desirable, or if you have if you're looking for a 10K per month apartment, none of these conversations matter. So it's like prejudice out the window, so if you are socially desirable, these conversations don't matter. I feel like what she was saying was one of those things. So it's like, yes, these conditions apply only if regular people, but otherwise.
No, I think you're right. I
So
think
there's
you're right. But then again, it's very much in the Singapore and Asian context, because if I bring it back to the example for my mom, I know that my mom genuinely will like, it just would be nicer to speak German because I want to connect to your man.
Yeah,
so like, you know what I mean? So I think it really is specifically in the context of Singapore, obviously, where, you have these different expectations or prejudices in terms of different races. So I think, I think you're right. I agree with everything that you said.
I wanna add on to just maybe one thing. I feel like I've been overly critical. I don't think I'm telling anyone that they're wrong, because I think when it comes to preference, right, it's really hard to judge people for it because it's a deeply personal thing. Like if you have a preference, you can't say it's unkind to tell them that your preference is wrong.
That's the thing, like you cannot. But what because it has all these layers, and here again, is the layer that I am a white woman that has suffered as the trophy and like had bad experience from that, or is the issue that I am the Indian man who had bad experience because other Indians have made other women feel uncomfortable, and now I have to overcome that. So there's so many layers and aspects and perspectives to it that you can't, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That already add to it. That how did I grow up? what do I like? Again, what the Chinese Polish guy said. I think it's very applicable. How did I grow up? Who I'm connecting with because we're sharing the same culture in likes and be it music or hobbies or whatever. I think this is still a really huge part of our preference, but it's in our environment and context and the experiences that we've had and people around us had. I think it's just way too many layers to say this is right or wrong. It's just such a complex topic with so many realities.
The generous side of me wants to say that yes, you're absolutely right, but there is one part of me, and I'll be brutally honest, there's one part of me it's like, what a fucking cop-out, guys. Speak your truth. It's like, I just felt that everybody here was trying so hard to project an image of inclusivity.
So what would you think would be the most honest answer? Someone would have said like, yeah, I just want a Chinese girl. If you would have said that?
It would be crass, but if that is their truth, I think.
But what I liked about his example that he said, I grew up with my mother in Asia and my brother grew up in the West, and we have different preferences based on where we grew up. I think that wasn't a bad example. But was that the example that where they grew up, a white woman is more favorable than here a Chinese woman is?
I'm struggling to unpack that, to be honest, because on the one hand, I do understand that, how you grow up plays a part in how you choose, your partner or what you particularly like. I guess my issue wasn't with what he said. It was just about my perception of him, just throwing out platitudes for the camera versus actually being honest about it. This is me being completely biased. Maybe I'm looking at it purely cynically, and I'm seeing these guys using all the right buzzwords and all that stuff, and I'm like, shut the fuck up,
so
guys.
what would you have liked to hear? Like, what was the truth that you feel
I don't know.
you wanted to hear?
I think... I don't know.
Speak your truth. What would have been your answer?
I think...
What would have been your answer? Exactly if you were sitting with them.
Damn it. I wish I did not. I wish I did not go down this route. Specifically about racial preference in dating, I would say that I have no preference, but I will admit that the novelty does excite me. So I've, my dating life has been...
The thumbs up?
No, well, it's not about the social proof, though.
Yeah, no,
it's mostly about like the sense that, hey, this is something new, and I would gravitate towards something like that. And I dare say it's mostly an extension of my personality in which I like novelty, right?
Yeah.
So I would go with that. But then now that you asked me this, and now that I put it this way, I sound exactly like those guys. So I'm going to take back everything I said. I'm probably going to cut this entire clip out of it. No, okay, all right. That's a fair point. Man, I think this really exemplifies how difficult it is to talk about
and how
preference.
It's every different experience, how we grew up, what we get from others. Like, again, when I get the question and it's like, oh, you're dating a brown or black man, I get so protective. Like, so I'm more offended but I almost feel insulted because I feel like you're offending someone that I love. While you're like, Mom, are you giving me the thumbs up? We're getting very different experience, but that's just one example, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I'm saying. I think there is no straight answer to it. Yeah. It's the same for when I was wondering, like, is that fetish thing a neutral thing? Is it an insult and all that stuff? It just and that's what we're having the conversation for, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
To show how complex this topic is with gender, race, who is the other race that you're with, and all that stuff, and all that in one specific context, and that is tiny red dot Singapore.
Yeah. So I wanna end with maybe thoughts about preference versus prejudice, right? So just to quickly backtrack for a very short while. So for me, preference is about something that you like. There is a positive connotation to it, whereas prejudice is about negating a particular community and all that, right? And once again, it goes back to what we said about our preferences are entirely based on our upbringing, our what we saw, what we've seen, what we've experienced, and therefore we gravitate towards certain things. But I do believe that we all owe it to ourselves to do some self-introspection as to why there is a specific exclusivity, or let me rephrase that. Why is there a specific exclusion to your preference, and this is where it gets slightly problematic. An example that I want to use is a conversation that I had recently, where someone said, "Oh, I'm okay with dating anyone except if they're Muslim." So, once again, we could chalk it down to preference, and it gets a little difficult because coming from India, we feel there's a political angle to it, but it may not be just his preference and whatever. But at the same time, I just feel that he hasn't put enough thought as to why that is, right? We can assume that there's a lot of issues around it because the Muslim charter, for example, so you have to convert in order to marry. He's probably exposed to friends who are more devout. And therefore he feels like, okay, religion is a big part of their life, and that's why he wants to avoid that particular, difficulty and trouble. But at the same time, if you're going to make sweeping assumptions, I think every once in a while reviewing it would be ideal, in the sense that, are you disallowing yourself the opportunity to meet new people simply because of an arbitrary boundary that you made based on something a while ago? And it's something like spring cleaning,
I like what you're saying, and I sometimes sit down with myself and be like, hey, do you need to open up a little bit more on just like who you're. But then there's this one thing that I can help, and that's my natural sense of feeling of attraction.
Yep.
You walk in, I think you're hot, and unfortunately that didn't happen with that blonde man so far. So like that's the thing. Like, I'm trying to tell myself, if I'm trying to tell myself, open up, maybe you should just so am I going to go out with someone that I don't think is hot? Because that is the simple start of it. It is the naked attraction, right? It is the appearance is a thing. And that, again, is a preference. I don't know how much that is something that you can talk about, like race and yada, 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 because I'm talking about features. Yeah. Hair color, whatever, something that for some reason I think is more interesting than another hair color.
You bring up an excellent point. At the end of the day, we can rationalize our choices all we want, but naked attraction is going to trump all of them. So it's like, and then you're going to retroactively apply justifications to it just to say that, hey, I like this person just because this.
And then there's like all the other things, right? Like voice, smell, like these things that we're not aware of. So that those things will still come in at some point. So I think, as much as I think it's good to call us out and like call myself out and be like, hey, don't do this because you're generalizing a race or anything like that. But in the end, I'm also not going to force myself to go out with someone that I just not find attractive. Yeah.
And that's where it gets interesting, because then it's like, in that case, just calling them out on their preference / prejudice is unfair, because it's like, who the fuck are you? Like, what right do you have to force
to tell me what I should like?
So it's true. At the end of the day, preference, prejudice, whatever it may be, it's a deeply personal thing, and I think no one should judge that except the person who has these preferences or prejudices. Yeah. So,
but still, we should always be encouraged to have the awareness of why we're choosing partners. Yeah. We all know that we can't change who we're attracted to, but have the awareness. Yeah. Speak about it, I guess. Yeah. I think that's important.
And I don't think we have to like hold a gun to our heads, for not doing it. But yeah, I don't know. Like, self introspection is always great, especially when it comes to like deeply personal topics. So, yeah.
I think it's important to talk about, and that's what we're doing. So, mic drop.
It's expensive.
No, but I mean it. Like, we wanted to have this conversation, I think, a year ago, way before you started this whole thing. Yeah. And, when you asked me if I'm okay to do this on video, I'm like, oh, really? Are we talking about this on video? But at the same time, I immediately thought, I think this is an important topic, and I'm so glad we're finally doing this. This is my third podcast with you, and it's that one topic I always wanted to do, because I think it's interesting, and I think it's important to talk about, because there's so many couples affected, and I think so many people that, because it has so many angles, I like the idea of us two sharing that experience.
That's what we're all about. And that's what living in Lion City is all about. Before we wrap it up, any final thoughts, Jasmine?
No, I think I just really that was my final thought.
Oh,
I think
right.
It's just something
Damn it,
that
okay.
you. No, but I really like. I can encourage
No.
people to have the open conversation. I think it was nice. I like the opportunity to share some experiences. Some things that I don't like.
Yeah.
That I experience. And being approached when people know who I'm dating. I like to hear your thoughts. I'm just glad we had this conversation. I think it's a good one to have,
I did.
especially in Singapore.
And thank you so much, Jasmine, for being part of this. I guess all I wanted to say at this point was that I went into this conversation with a definitive idea of what is justified and what's not. And even though in the back of my head I felt that, okay, it's a deeply personal thing and sometimes you shouldn't judge people, you called me out on me judging people, especially as far as the video is concerned. So it just goes to show that even though I'm informed of a lot of things, even though I feel like I understand the underlying behaviors and all that stuff, I still get caught in this bullshit, right? I'm judgmental of preferences that I have no right to judge.
But I think at the same time, I'm not sure if I can say that, but I find it's almost impossible to be 100% correct, because it is impossible to include everyone's experience. Like as I said earlier with my privilege, I know it's there, but it's impossible to know the extent of it.
Yeah.
And so whatever we're thinking, we can try to be aware, we can try to have those conversations and call ourselves out and all that stuff, but I think it's just human and normal that we'll never get to the point where it's perfectly correct and in everyone's perspective.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be like friction along these, fault lines. And I shouldn't call them fault lines. I mean, these things happen. And honestly, the more we talk about this, I think the better understanding we have.
Amen.
And on that note, Jasmine, it was an absolute pleasure having you.
Thanks for